What's up you guys, Devin here coming at you with another video. Today is going to be part 2 of our menu tutorial. If you've missed part 1, I'm going to link it at the top. Part 1 was focused all around the photo portion of the Lumix S series cameras. I kind of just went and broke down every piece of the photo menu, and today we're going to continue by breaking down every piece of the video menu and possibly the rest of the menu system as well if we have time. So we'll see if this is going to be a 2-part thing or a 3-part thing, but anyway, let's jump into it. I'm going to start off by putting on this filter so we can see the screen with more accurate colors. There we go. And just like the last video, before we start, make sure your dial at the top is turned on M with the little movie. You can access the video menu by the other settings as well, but having it on movie kind of just gives you a little more flexibility if you're going to be setting up the custom menu buttons for like custom 1, custom 2, custom 3. But after you have it set on movie, looking at the top, we have exposure mode. This is just like the dial, only it's something you can access within the camera if you're on movie mode, and that is exposure mode. And we have all the things that the dials have at the top. We have pretty much what is a automatic, a aperture priority where you'll control the shutter speed and the aperture will be controlled for you, a aperture priority mode where you'll control the aperture, the shutter speed will be controlled for you, shutter priority where you'll control the shutter speed and aperture will be controlled for you, and then we have full manual, which is the one we're going to be choosing because at the end of the day we should be learning how to shoot manual. We have a really nice camera. Any of the S cameras are considered professional cameras as far as I'm concerned, and you should learn how to use the professional settings. Going one step down, we have photo style. This is pretty much all of your profiles. I have a more in-depth video of that which I'll link at the end of the video if you want to know which color profiles I personally use the most. We're not going to spend too much time on the profiles because I did a whole separate video saying which ones I use that I'll link at the end of this one. In the photo tutorial, we went over how you shouldn't be using Vlog or HLG when you're shooting photo on these cameras, and that's mostly just due to it creating really dark images in post. You can recover them pretty well, but it's just kind of a wacky starting point as opposed to like starting in standard or vivid or anything else. If you're shooting raw, none of those profiles matter, but Vlog and HLG do affect it. HLG and log are going to be your profiles with the most dynamic range. You'll be able to recover the most highlights and the most shadows out of these two profiles. They're the most flat profiles. HLG does look a little colored, but it just gives you a ton of latitude. It's pretty much a high dynamic range type of image, and so you will be able to get a lot of highlights back, even though it looks like you're blowing them out in camera. But anyway, for the sake of time, if you're interested about learning more about these profiles, just check them out at the end of this video. But for the sake of this video, we're going to keep it in standard because it does unlock a few more menu options that we won't normally get if we didn't have it in this mode. Some of these are going to have an overlap with the photo menu, such as photo style. Metering mode is the same as the one in the photo mode, so go check out that video. Dual native ISO is basically having your two noise floors. I have this set to auto. The first noise floor is 640 in log, and the second noise floor is 4000 in Vlog. I like this to switch automatic, so I just keep it on auto. We have ISO sensitivity, same thing as the photo mode, except this one is in video. Basically, if you wanted to use auto ISO for some reason, you could choose that you didn't want the camera to go past a certain limit. This would just basically stop you or the camera from making any mistakes and going past a noise floor that you know you didn't want to go past. Flicker decrease in video, it's not available right now. It would basically decrease any kind of flickering you would have from being in bad lighting. I'm not sure why it's grayed out. I never personally use this. This is stuff I'd go and use a trick in post to fix. Eye dynamic range is if you're shooting in one of the standard profiles. This will not show up for log because that's flat footage. It kind of gives you a little more dynamic range where it sacrifices the shadows to make the highlights a little better. You can turn that on low, standard, high, or auto. I don't use it at all. I do not use vignette compensation either, just something else to kind of correct. When it comes to video and photo, these are things I just like to correct in post. It's not something I really want the camera doing for me. Diffraction compensation, if you have a lens that's showing a little bit of diffracting in some areas, you can turn this on or try to fix it. Filter settings is if you want the fun little filter effects. I do color grades in post, so I do not use these. Auto exposure in PASRM mode. This is actually kind of cool. This gives you just the ability to use auto exposure no matter what mode you're in if you want to let your ISO auto expose for you. As you can see, I would like to actually keep this on. Basically, it's just a difference on if you're going to be able to switch to auto or not. You could turn this off if you never want to like accidentally hit it. I just keep it on because I'm not really ever accidentally switching it to auto. I'm pretty well aware because it shows it on my screen what it's basically going to. I virtually never use it, but I do keep it on. Moving on, we have creative video combined set. I do not mess with this at all. I just keep it all on photo. I'm pretty sure it has something to do with like some automatic modes, and I just don't care for it. I do not mess with it. This is really good. SS gain and operation. This is if you'd want to use shutter angle or if you'd want to use shutter. So for those of you who don't know, shutter angle, as you can see right here, as opposed to if we're in photo mode, we'll see a shutter speed. So basically, to explain the difference to you real quick, if you're shooting 24 frames a second, to get lifelike motion blur, you would want to shoot at 48 shutter. We can't achieve 48 shutter, so most people would just settle for 50. However, in this camera, we have the ability to use shutter angle. And shutter angle is nice because you can put it to 180 and it will always virtually be double your shutter speed. So then we can achieve 48 shutter. This is also really nice because it's a lot less to remember, whereas let's say you were shooting 24 frames a second, then you're like, oh, I want to do some slow motion, I'm going to shoot 60 frames a second. You could switch it to 60, but if you are someone who forgets to switch your shutter to like 125 after, and you try to slow down that 60 frames a second in post, because you shot at a 50 shutter speed, you will not be able to slow down that 60 frames a second at all. It will just be like completely useless as far as you wanting to slow it down, and it will kind of not look that great either. However, by having this on shutter angle and having this on 180-degree shutter, it at all times will be exactly double the frame rate. So you can just switch from 60 to 30 to 24, and as long as this says 180, you will always have that double the frame rate smooth motion. So as you can see, we're at 60 frames a second right now, but if we just want to hurry up and go and change it to like 24 frames a second, well, bam, 180. We don't ever have to mess with that. Now your image will brighten and darken a little bit whenever you change this, because the frame rates itself, 60 frames, will just be a little darker because it's naturally changing the shutter speed. But overall, it's a whole step you just do not have to remember. So if you're shooting professional video, I would highly suggest turning this on shutter angle. When you go back to the photo modes, it will go back to shutter speed, but it's just really nice that when you go to your video mode, you will have the shutter angle and it's just on there. So yeah, keep that on angle. It's very, very useful. Moving on to the image format menu, we have record quality. This will look a little different if you haven't purchased the Vlog upgrade, or if you're on an S1R, or if you're on an S1H, you'll actually have more options. It also depends on what format you're shooting in. I shoot an MOV, which we'll talk more about as we go down the menu. But as you can see here, just to give you real quick, this is an S1. It'll look very similar in the S5, very similar in the S1H, very similar in the S1R, aside for having a few extra frame rates, as I said. But we have full HD at 30, full HD at 60, 10-bit, 4K, 150 megabytes, 24 frames a second. This is actually at UHD, that's what that resolution is. 4K 10-bit 30, 4K 8-bit 60, which does crop in, 4K 10-bit 60, which still crops into a Super 35 sensor, but we have the option. Then we have Cinema 4K, which is 4K as well, but it's a higher resolution. I did learn that there's not too much of a difference between these two. If you want it to automatically be in this format, it will shoot in this, but it is not using the full sensor. It's actually creating that aspect ratio off the sensor that's in the camera. So it is something where you could shoot in this mode, actually have a little bit more image, but then in post you can go and change your timeline to Cinema 4K, and this would just actually give you a little more image to work with. But we have Cinema 4K, 10-bit, 24, 30, 60, as well as the 8-bit option. And then as we keep going up, we have anamorphic in 4K at 10-bit, in 24 and 30. We have 5.4K, we have 5.9K at 24 and 30, and we have 6K at 24p in 10-bit. These are a lot of options. Like, this is so many options for a camera to have. Depending on what camera you have will depend on the record time limit. The S1H, for example, can shoot infinite 6K, infinite 4K 60. The S5 can shoot infinite 4K, but not 4K 60. It's 30 minutes. The S1 is also locked into 30 minutes. You can just keep recording. It doesn't ever really have any overheating problems, but you can't just like leave your camera and forget about it. Though most people are not shooting 4K 60 for longer than 30 minutes. It's a lot of waste of footage. You don't want to really slow anything down that much for that amount of time, but it is there if you need it. I believe if you have an S1R, while you don't have options to log or all of these like really nice high codecs, you do have the option to shoot full frame 6K. Even though it's line skipped, the quality isn't as good. It's cool that you guys actually get to use the full frame of your sensor, which can come in handy. Moving on, we have high speed video. This will not be able to be accessed access in every single mode. You will have to make sure that you're in a proper mode to access all the features. So example like full HD will give you access to it, but you basically go to high speed video. This will be a little different in every camera. In these modes, you will have no audio. It automatically slows down the footage, and you can choose to speed it up to normal if you want later. But as you can see, you've got some pretty cool options here. I virtually never use the 4K 48 or the 4K 60 because I can just shoot 4K 60 with audio and slow it down later in post. However, the cool ones to use are the HD 150 and the HD 180. In 180 it does crop into Super 35, but it's pretty clean. There's a little bit of noise in it. You can't control everything as much as you would like to control it. But as you can see, there's a crop here. We still have full control. You will see a little bit more noise given that it's HD and it's 180 frames a second. However, if you're in good lighting, this becomes less of an issue because it actually does look like just a really solid image. So it's cool that you have that feature. You know, little gimmicky. It's not something you need all the time, but it's something that's there if you need it. Before we move on, make sure you turn your high-speed video mode off, otherwise it'll lock us out of some of our other menu options. Moving on, we have Switch NTSC or PAL. This would just depend on if you're in Europe or if you're in America. In America, we have like 24 frames a second. In Europe, they use like 25 frames a second. All of their frame rates are a little bit different, so depending on the region you're in, you have the option to switch back and forth. That's really nice. Some cameras just region lock you, where like if you bought a camera in America, you can't mess with any of the PAL settings, but Lumix gives us maximum flexibility, which I really enjoy, and we can switch. Record file format, this is something I was talking about earlier. Depending on what you're on in your record format is going to depend on the codecs you have options to. Real quick, just to show you as an example, we're going to move on to MP4, and as you can see, we only have like 5 options we can shoot in. Now, MP4s are a lot easier in your computer, so if you're handing footage to a client and you weren't editing it, this might be a mode that you actually want to think to shoot in, because computers will just have an easier time. The bit rates, you know, full HD, it's like 28 megabits and 100 megabits. Like these bit rates are really small, 8-bit color. Like this is easy footage to work with. However, it's not nearly as good as the flexibility as having an MOV. These MOV files are like beautiful and gorgeous, but you know, 100 megabit codecs for the full HD, you can really see it's like literally 4 times the amount of data, but also 4 times the amount of flexibility in post, which is really good. Time code, we do have the option to use time code if we were syncing multiple audio devices. I typically run audio straight into my camera, or I do like just syncs in post using the preamps that are built into the camera and like external recorders, which is actually how I'm shooting this video. Moving on down, we have luminance level. I don't know a ton about this. All I know is I'm supposed to keep it on 64 by 1023. There's virtually like no reason to change this, so make sure your settings on this and then don't worry about it again. Moving on down to HDMI raw data output. This is one of the awesome things about this camera. It kind of gives you the ability to upgrade the camera later on in time if you want to. You can get an Atmos recorder or a Blackmagic recorder coming with the new update, and it's going to allow you to record 5.9K RAW to an external recorder, giving you even more flexibility and creating giant file sizes as well. It's going to be hard to edit these things. You gotta make sure you have the computer and the know-how of how to color raw footage, but it's cool because at any point in time you want to take your S5 or your S1 or your S1H and supercharge it. You get one of those monitors, you turn this feature on, and then you have a supercharged little pocket cinema camera. It's not that pocket. I mean, it's a pretty big camera, but the fact that you can get that kind of quality off of something this size is still kind of insane to me. Moving on down to the focus menu, we have autofocus custom settings for video. Sometimes I keep this off, I'm shooting manual, sometimes I'll turn it on. It's pretty good though. If you go into the menu, you can set it. Basically it allows you to change the autofocus speed, which is something you would just want to keep very fast if you were doing photo, but in video, if you were ever using the autofocus to try to do a focus pull or something in a controlled environment, you actually have the ability of how fast your autofocus is going to move, whereas like a fast focus pull would never really look that good. You can change the speed of this. I think what I decided is I like the autofocus speed at like 3, and I like the sensitivity at like +2 or +1. This was kind of like a sweet spot for me. I find that focus pull is really good and just really accurate around here. So you can try out these settings. 1 or 2 is probably the best for sensitivity, and like I said, I really like the look of 3. But if you want even a slower focus pull, you could of course bring your autofocus speed even lower. But that's a pretty cool feature that this camera gives you, and it's one that you shouldn't overlook if you're going to want the camera to do some of the work for you. Next, we have continuous autofocus mode. You can choose how your continuous autofocus acts, whereas you'd be on single or continuous or manual with this little switch right here. When you're on continuous, we can change it to mode 1, where continuous autofocus only works while the video is recording, or we can go to mode 2, where the continuous autofocus works all the time. Mode 1 will obviously save you a little battery, whereas mode 2 will allow you to practice your shots a couple of times to see how the camera's working even if you're not recording. I like mode 2 because I like to be able to see my autofocus points and use it while the camera's not recording. Yes, it uses a little more battery, but the amount of battery it uses is pretty minuscule, and mode 2 just kind of works a little bit better. Autofocus assist light, I actually normally keep this off. If you're in the dark, it is helpful, but if you're using stuff like multicam and someone's getting a side angle and you have your autofocus assist light, well then you're bursting an orange light and your B cam is now recording the orange light that you're shooting, and if they have theirs enabled, then you're recording their orange light, and it's kind of messing with your footage, so I like to keep this off. Focus peaking we like to keep on. Focus peaking is actually, let's see if we can recreate some right here. Oh yeah, so as you can see, focus peaking, there's all these blue lines. This is kind of to tell you that, hey, this is the object that's in focus. It's not always perfect, but it hits with about, I'd say, 98% accuracy, 99% accuracy. As of right now, this is a pretty easy subject for it to see, so this one's working very accurately. But focus peaking is pretty useful. I do like to keep it on. If it gets distracting, it's something you can turn off if you'd prefer to have a big monitor and you have someone pulling focus and maybe they want to see focus peaking on the monitor, but you don't want to see it on this one. Yeah, that's be a reason to turn it off. Moving down, we have one area autofocusing speed. This is if you're in a different autofocusing mode. The area 1 autofocus is like right here, so this is if you're not doing tracking, but like here you go. If you're in this autofocus mode where you just have your box that you can click on and move around, you can choose the autofocus speed of that. This is another one where I like it to just kind of be normal. I don't like fast autofocusing in video. It's not my thing. Usually I'm doing something that's more composed and melodic, and I want that smooth focus pull. I don't want like jarring quick action, though for action you might want faster, so that would be some reasons to put it on fast, but you know, I'm going to keep all mine on slow and normal. Moving on down to our audio menu, we have sound record display. You want to keep that on. That basically is going to give you this, so you can see if your audio's clipping. If you have the S1H, you actually get to see the exact decibels, like you get to see like -6, -12 dB. If you have any of the other cameras, you're not going to get to see that. You're just going to get this line. But basically all you have to know is this is about where -12 is, this is about where -6 is, and if you're hitting these last lines, you're probably clipping your audio and you probably need to adjust it. And speaking of adjusting it, we have sound record level adjust. So in the Lumix cameras, you can only go down to level 12. Unless you have an S1H, you can go down to level 18. There's never much reason why you're going to need to go higher. I find for my studio, -6 is kind of a sweet spot with my Rode mics that I use. But if you're in a loud environment, I definitely could see you going to like -12. Oh, would you look at that? Like right here is -12. So man, they should really just install this on the front. But even though it doesn't show you in this mode, basically when you get to about right here, that's -12. And when you get to over here, you're clipping. But right here, you can check your levels. You can tell your talent or whoever you're filming to be as loud as they're going to be. And you can see if it's clipping here, so you can commit to it beforehand. But yeah, see, -12, and we're still hitting that 12, like we're still getting really good audio. So normally I keep this on -6 or -12. It just depends on my environment. But this is kind of one of the privileges the S1H gets. It gets full control over its audio, or it can pick a low pass or a high pass, and we get stuck just, you know, sitting at -12 at best instead of having -18. So go -12, maybe get a mic that has an external solution where you can control more decibels on the mic itself, like the Rode Video Mic Pro is a pretty good one. But anyway, let's move on. Sound record limiter, I'll typically keep that off because I don't want it to really limit its own sound. I'll do that in post if I'm going to do that. If you want to try to cut any noise out on its own, you can keep that on, but it will permanently clip your audio, and that's just something I'd rather have more flexibility over. Wind noise canceling, it's on standard right now, but I'll typically keep that off as well. I'll typically use, like, you know, a wind sock or something, or a dead cat. A wind sock, it's not called that, it's called a dead cat. But anytime you see that fuzzy stuff on people's microphones, that's a dead cat, and it's you know, canceling the wind for you, so I wouldn't keep this on. Maybe if I was in an extreme situation or if I was in trouble, I would turn this on, but every time I've used it, which has only been a couple of times, the audio just sounded so strange and I didn't enjoy it, and so I just keep that off. Next is mic socket. It's basically going to allow you to choose how the mic socket acts. First one is probably going to be your most used, which is mic socket works as a mic input. Basically, power is supplied to an external mic by the camera. So if you use a Rode video mic of any kind that's sitting on top of your camera, this is where you would choose this one. I don't think I've ever really moved it from here. Going down, we have mic socket works as a mic input, but power is not supplied by the camera. So if you have a mic that's supplying its own power, has a battery in it, so maybe a Rode Video Mic Pro or Sennheiser or something like that, well, this would allow you to run the audio into the camera, but the camera itself will not be supplying power to the mic. And then we have line, where the camera does not supply power to any device that is plugged into the camera. I just keep this on the top one, plug in power. Pretty easy. We're going to have some grayed out options here because of the stereo mic and the XLR mic. I don't have the XLR adapter, but these are all settings you would get to mess with if you have the Lumix XLR adapter for the top, which will allow you to use XLR mics, which have a lot better quality. So basically, if you get bigger into sound design, these are things you're going to eventually run into. I haven't. I use external recorders for a lot of my stuff, so I don't need these. Sound output, you're going to want to just keep on real time for the most part. Waveform monitor, we can turn that on. Basically, this will give us access to waveforms, which is a pretty nice feature for video if you know how to use it. If you don't, just keep it off because it's distracting. Anamorphic de-squeeze, if you end up shooting with an anamorphic lens, it can de-squeeze in camera so you can see an actual view of what it looks like rather than seeing the squished image. It will kind of de-squeeze it in camera so you can just see your footage right away. And then these are all the different settings depending on what anamorphic lens you have is going to depend on which one of these you're going to need to pick. HDMI record output, this has to do with if you're using external monitor, you can change how much information is displayed to that external monitor. HDMI record output basically allows you to choose how monitors react. If you're going to be giving a monitor to a director, then maybe you don't want as much information on that monitor, or maybe you want more information on that monitor. So this setting just allows you to basically take advantage of that. And here in the last tab of the video, we only have two to deal with. You may have more depending on your camera, but we have the image stabilization, which I typically keep on unless I'm on a gimbal. If you're on a gimbal, you want to come here and turn this off because it will make your footage very wobbly because the IBIS in the camera will try to fight against the gimbal. But if you're doing everything handheld, this will just help you get incredibly smooth, stable footage. Moving on down, we have E-stabilization in video. I don't use this. I found every time I use this, it makes kind of like some little digital artifacting, and I don't enjoy it, so I do not mess with it. However, the boost image stabilization, I do keep that on because that is just pleasant. We get around 6 or 7 stops with a stabilized lens, and you can just handhold this thing, and you can almost get some gimbal-like shots with it. So that's what I keep the camera on if I'm doing handheld. And as I said, if you do a gimbal, we turn it off. Next, we have image area. Depending on what camera you have, this will say Super 35 or APS-C. That means the same thing. It's basically a 1.5 times crop. If you shoot 4K 60, you will get forced into this mode, but you do have the option to go into this mode on your own. And you might be thinking to yourself, well, why would I want to do that? But this actually has a pretty practical use. Like, let's say I was shooting something and I was zooming in with my 16 to 35, and I was like, okay, that's some pretty decent reach. We're getting the full frame of the sensor, but I wish I could reach out a little more. Well, I can go in image area and change it to APS-C. And this will allow me to have an APS-C size sensor, which is a 1.5 times crop, which basically means my 16 to 35 has now become a 24 to 70. This is pretty good in a pinch. If you have one lens, you don't have time to switch, or you only can afford one lens, and you can get kind of 2 lenses out of it. You take virtually no hit in quality from what I can tell in this mode, but you get some extra focal range out of it. So it's a pretty useful feature to have. It's for this reason alone that I think a 16 to 35 is so powerful on this camera. And it's just because you're getting a 16 to 35, you're also getting a 24 to 70, which can take care of pretty much most of your work that has to do with any kind of documentary stuff or real estate type stuff. You've got it covered completely. Now, if you know you're going to be shooting stuff that's further away, then maybe you don't want to get a 16-35, then you can get something like a 24-105, and you can turn that thing into something that more resembles like a 50 to 150. So that's like really, really awesome. But this is a really cool feature. Don't underestimate it. You also have the option to do pixel by pixel, which I'm not exactly sure. I believe it's a 2x crop. As you can see, we're even closer now. The only problem with this mode is you do actually take a pretty big hit in quality of your footage. I mean, I can see it on the screen here. I don't know if you guys can see, but there's a ton of noise and the image just isn't as good. I typically never use pixel by pixel. I'd much rather shoot 5.9K or 4K and just zoom in and post because the image is a lot cleaner. Considering the pixel by pixel mode is actually 1080p as well, it doesn't make much sense to use it. You're much better off just shooting APS-C or full and cropping in and post. And yeah, that's pretty much going to wrap up the video menu tutorial. If you want to check out the photo menu tutorial, I did one a couple of days ago. I'll link it at the top. As well as if you're interested in learning more about the color profiles I use, I'll also link that video in the description as well. Check both of those out. I guess this is going to be a 3-part because we still have like these little menu items to go through, and I'm kind of just exhausted at talking after this much. I don't want the videos to be too long. I'd rather split them up into part 1, 2, and 3. So I guess we are going to have a part 3 to this. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed. If you have any additional comments, leave them down below. Hit the like button to help me out. It helps with the YouTube algorithm, as well as subscribe for more videos in the future. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.